you to everyone for coming out tonight. We're having our third artist talk as part of the Woonasquatucket Greenway Arts project. We want to thank the City of Providence, who helped fund this project through a grant from the National Endowment of the Arts. The bigger scope of the Woonasquatucket River Greenway Arts project is showcasing temporary public art and performance along the Greenway, including performance projects by Manton Avenue Project and the Wilbury Theater Group, sculptural animal habitats developed by the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council and Steelyard artists, a lighting installation by Waterfire Arts, and gallery exhibitions like this one in our storefront window at the Dirt Palace. And this is all happening from October of last year through July of 2019. So this is the third Artist Talk event that we're hosting as part of the project. We had commissioned 6 artists this year to make new work in conversation with the river, its history, and future plans for the neighborhood Greenway. We're happy to present Dark Side of the Woon, an installation by artist Sto Len. Tonight he is going to discuss his work with local musician, luthier, and Woonasquatucket River paddle guide Erik Talley. And with that, I'll pass it along to Erik.
Hey everybody, how you doing? All right. So, I met Sto yesterday. Full disclosure, we already talked about a lot of this, so it's going to feel spontaneous, but we preloaded a little bit, okay? I also have his bio here that I'm going to read, which is fascinating, and I'm learning for the first time too. Sto Len is a printmaker, painter, installation, and performance artist with interests in site-specific improvisation within a variety of media. His current body of work transforms the traditional printmaking art of sumonagashi floating ink into an experimental collaboration with nature and a site of discourse on environmentalism and art activism. It's a tricky sentence. He has exhibited his work internationally, including exhibitions in New York, Vietnam, Japan, London, Australia, Denmark, Canada, and Mexico City. Sto co-founded the alternative art space Cinders Gallery in Brooklyn, New York, which has exhibited hundreds of artists since its inception in 2004. And continues to curate as a project-based nonprofit arts organization. Sto is based in Brooklyn, New York, with familial roots in Vietnam, and his work incorporates these bonds by connecting issues of both their history, environment, traditions, and politics. Welcome, Sto. How are you doing?
I'm good, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here too. So I just want to open up with a quick thing. It's a little about me, but I promise it'll be more about Sto. But I saw that you said on Instagram you labeled me as a musician, luthier, and expert river rat.
Yeah.
Which made my heart grow 10,000 sizes. When I was growing up, I grew up in North Carolina, and you did some growing up in Richmond, yeah?
Yeah.
So similar kinds of environments, and my dad would take my brother and I out to the Petey River in North Carolina, a big old winding river down there. And we would just hang out and catch catfish and run around on rocks. My dad basically had no friends that I knew of as a kid, except for an entire class of weird old dudes called river rats, which Snag was the guy we mostly hang out with, who would just snag. Yeah. They'd build like a weird shack on the river, sometimes on stilts, so the dam wouldn't flood it, and anybody who wanted could paddle out there and just catfish all day and catch fish, and that was their primary art form.
Wow.
And that made me think a lot of what you're doing, because that was all happening in rural rivers, and those guys, nobody owned anything, they just kind of took possession of what they thought was important on the river. And I'm curious, like, how you found your experience with the river.
Yeah, I think I would have totally hung out with those guys.
They're great.
But I like the idea of a river rat, and I've always lived in the city, so the idea of an urban river rat, you know, and then living in New York, the rats they're so vivacious, you know. They'll outlive us all, and I like being prepared for, you know, anything that could happen. So yeah, I think, you know, when I first moved to New York, I'll just show some images while we talk. This is actually the first time I came to New York and hung out on the water. And what I loved about the waterfront in New York City was it was actually a place where you could go to be alone. Like, there wasn't that many people out there. It sort of felt abandoned and quiet, and it was an escape from the city. And, you know, when I moved to New York, I started just spending a lot of time at the water, because as much as I like people, I gotta get away, you know. And it was interesting in an urban setting because the waterfront at that time especially was not something that people went to, you know, and it was almost like in New York, everyone has their backs to the water because they're focused on the spectacle of the city, you know, so the city is distracting them with, you know, all kinds of stuff, right? And I was like, this is great, you know, I can like hang out. It was virtually abandoned, you know, I mean, I don't know if anyone's been to Williamsburg waterfront recently, but there's no like cars overturned anymore, you know, which some would say is progress, but in a lot of ways, you know, there was something beautiful about this time. You know, as a new person to New York, I found myself there a lot, and it started my love affair with being down by the water.
Now, were you boating at all at this time, making boats traveling on the water, or just kind of exploring next to it?
No, just hanging out down by the water. It took maybe 14 years for me to actually get on the water.
All right.
And funny enough, the first person to take me on the water was Marie Lorenz.
Who probably more than one person here has had a weird on the river adventure with Marie Lorenz. Yeah, I definitely.
Yeah.
Some rad stuff happened.
So yeah, in a funny way, Providence has like been connected to my waterway experience, you know. And Marie, for those of you who don't know, builds her own boats, and she actually takes people out in a project called Tidewater Taxi, and that's one of her works, is taking people on these rides. So she took me on a ride, and she showed me how easy it was to just launch from wherever you kind of could, and I was smitten. So that's when I started, around 2014, 15.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so at the same time that you're exploring the river and kind of discovering the places around it, you're also making art, I assume, simultaneous to this, yes?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was how did those things converge? Back us up to where you were maybe working in printmaking and things like that.
Yeah, and then, you know, again, another connection to Providence. I've always loved printmaking, and this town especially has a super great history of printmakers, you know. And so I was always really a fan of a lot of the artwork coming out of Providence. Myself, I'm a terrible printmaker. I'm just not a good screen printer, you know. And I was always kind of bummed about that. But I was looking for my own type of printmaking, I think, and I found it through Suminagashi. I think I have do I have a slide? Oh yeah, well, so I started painting with Sumi ink, and Sumi ink actually, it naturally floats on water. And around 2013, I started painting with Sumi ink, these types of paintings, kind of abstract, fluid ink drawings, basically, stuff like this. And I love this whole process, just kind of painting on everything. Painting and making weird places to be in, murals, but the thing about Sumi ink is that it floats on water. And so when I discovered that, I started painting on top of the water, and I realized this is a way to print make where you could make a floating painting basically and put paper on the surface and print from the top. So this is like an example of an ancient style of Suminagashi.
But did you discover this like convergently on your own, that this was how this style of art had been made?
Yeah, and it's funny too because I like spilled some ink on the water and thought, oh my god, it floats, you know. And I printed and I thought I was a genius and was the only person who'd ever done it before. But then when I researched it, I realized they were doing it since the 12th century in Japan. Right? So, but I was still, I was really into it, and as I want to do, I just go deep into it. And so the more I did it, the more I kind of, this is actually how I reacted the first time I did it.
Wait, who are these folks?
I do classes sometimes for kids, and it is magic though when you see it, because you're like, you just like get the print, and I'm still like that when I do it. It's amazing. It's like magic. But I started, in my own way, like kind of using oil paints and color, in inflatable swimming pools in my studio, basically trying to create, you know, a body of water in my studio. So it started this like relationship with water in the art practice. But I hadn't left the studio yet. I was just making these prints with color and water and inside pools, and I started making books, you know, and the great thing about printmaking, you know, you just be industrious. Like, I love making a lot of stuff. Just make, you know, and
Get into the flow and just ignore everyone.
yeah, for days, you know.
You know who you are.
Weeks, yeah. I love that. So I have found my process, and this was great because I didn't have to worry about registration, you know. Each one is a monoprint, each one is unique. I could be as messy as I wanted to be. I could be like totally chaotic, and have a lot of fun with it. And the more I started doing it, I think this is a video, the more, you know, I just got into kind of creating situations for it to happen.
Right.
Putting natural materials in it, dirt, you know, whatever I could get to float, basically. And the more I did that, the more, I don't know, I wanted like a natural situation.
So at what point did you make any connection between these kind of bodies of water you'd been creating, and particularly in an urban area, things you had been seeing happening in the rivers and eddy pools and things like this? Like,
Yeah.
where did you make that connection? How far and how with it?
This is actually, well, yeah, because I've been hanging out down by the water a lot. In New York City, of course, just like anywhere, unfortunately, the water is really polluted. And so I would be drinking beer down by the river, you know. But I would notice, I mean, the river was really polluted, especially where I was hanging out. In New York City, the Newtown Creek is kind of the zone that I've been hanging out the most, and it's kind of a, you know, it's a Superfund site. It's one of the most polluted bodies of water in the country, unfortunately, you know.
Right.
But I would see things like what I was doing, you know. And I was like, oh, that's just, you know, I'm trying to do that in a weird way. And then I saw this photograph in particular. This is a BP oil spill, you know, and you can see the boat. And I was like, oh my God, that's like what I'm doing. And this is a horrible situation, but it is undeniably beautiful in this really weird way, you know. And I wanted to explore that. So this is a photograph of the Newtown Creek and the kind of stuff that I would see out there, you know. And so I went with paper to the water and started to print it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing it from land for a long time, and then Marie was like, let me take you on a boat ride.
Yeah, and get access to all of the
Yeah.
river.
Yeah,
You have a really limited amount of scenarios at the shore.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
And so Marie, this is a photograph actually of our first trip together, me and Marie, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. So I got a boat like a couple weeks later, you know. And then there's nothing more freeing than having a boat and just going, you know, you might be in a crazy city like New York or you know, you being here, and you, as you can attest, you get away from it all.
Yeah, it's
like
amazing
that.
because you're invincible in a
Right.
really weird way. Nobody can touch you.
Yeah.
No one will even talk to you half the time on the water. You can
Yeah.
just kind of drift along. They're like, that guy must be doing something.
Right.
Yeah, like I told you, that was when I lived in Eagle Square. Like, that was my way to escape any loud kind of band practices or anything in the house, was
Right.
to get in my canoe, put on the Woonasquatucket, just tie it to those bridges under Alco and take a nap. That was my jam.
So cool. Yeah, do you remember the first time you went on the Woonasquatucket?
You know, not super clearly, but my good friend Rob Coggeshall, who unfortunately isn't here tonight, but he brought a canoe that was his family boat, and because we were on the top floor of like an old mill building, so we had a block and tackle to like haul it up in there, you know, and we got it in. I do remember that the first time I went paddling, that was the first time in my life I'd ever been on a body of water that was so affected by tides.
Wow.
It's like I didn't think about anything. We just got in the boat, paddled, and in no time at all it was like ground out. And I was like, this river has no water in it. What's the deal? Because I was stupid.
Yeah, you learn.
Yeah, I don't think I knew it was polluted to the extent that it is for a
Yeah.
long time either.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And that comes with spending time with it, though, right? I started to learn way more about the Newtown Creek by actually going on the water, seeing it firsthand, you know, making these prints. I mean, let's see. Oh yeah, there's one. You know, like that whole. I mean, the process of like seeing the residue that we made, you know, as people, industry, whatever, and then capturing it. It was crazy to me. You know, I was like, wow, like here it is. This is like
A photograph.
a photograph of
Image of it.
how many years, you know, like the pollution could be 100 years old, you know, for
Right.
all I know.
I mean, that's a thing we had talked about, and I'm still curious about, like, is it ever a challenge to reconcile the fact that you have these beautiful images and like that BP oil spill? We all know it's a stomach-churning nightmare, but it's also like objectively a beautiful thing, just like all of this. So like, how do you have to reconcile that with yourself? What's the conflict there for you?
Yeah, I mean, it is a conflict, you know, but I think ultimately the water itself is a beautiful material. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing, and it can even take something as messed up as a giant oil spill that we did to it and make it beautiful, you know. I don't know. To me, it's like these are like homages to the water, the power of the water, the beauty of the water, you know. And ultimately, I feel like it's been a way to seduce the public into talking and thinking about this stuff, you know. Because if you just show people horrible things, I don't know if that works. You know, I mean, we all maybe know it's bad, or things are bad, or it's polluted. But like, what's the point of beating people over the head with ugliness? You know, if you can sort of turn it and make something beautiful out of something ugly, so we can talk about it more. Maybe that's a way to get to it. You know.
I mean, I just noticed that we looked at the window earlier, and how any other time, if you were to take the garbage from the river and lay it out for somebody, it would basically be an indictment. There'd be no way to avoid it being like, this is what. No, you never really found out even what actually happened.
No, like the government kind of covered it up. I think the word on the street was it was a steel company that had dumped, and it had happened before, and it happens every couple years, and it's sort of like that's what happens, you know, to the people there, you know. It just puts things in perspective.
That's heavy.
When you see that.
So how were you received then in Vietnam when you kind of showed your work?
Well, that was interesting because I mean, people were super fascinated with that process, and just, you know, I would kind of be on a boat. You know, people would crowd around me because I would, all of a sudden, here's this guy like floating up to through the swamp or something to land, and I'm like printing, and you know, I might as well have been from another planet. I mean, people didn't know what I was doing, you know. But after a while, they're like, oh, you're like kind of collecting information. You know, you're getting stuff. You're fishing for this stuff. You're getting, you know, they could figure it out.
Right.
And then when this happened, people actually found out like, oh, this guy, he was in there right before the fish kill. And whatever killed those fish are in his prints. So they sent like a news crew to the art show and like interviewed me and stuff about it. And I just told them what I saw, you know. But it was great because I had a little YouTube clip. It was all in Vietnamese, and I could go around, and so I was bringing it to fishermen, and we were kind of talking about it, and I was showing them the clip, you know.
Right, to show that this water is actually polluted.
Yeah,
You shouldn't eat
and I
this.
was like, maybe don't fish right now, you know, and people are like, I have to, you know, I'm hungry, or I need to make money, you know.
Right.
So it was really great to have that kind of dialogue, but it was also really hard because I couldn't really stop people, you know. I mean,
Right.
they're gonna do what they're doing.
Even seeing here the signs that say do not eat the fish or shellfish, right, on the Woonasquatucket that date back to like earlier emigrations of people coming into Providence, refugees, and just being like, oh good, a river, now we can eat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Signs of Vietnamese.
Yeah, in Vietnamese, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That looked. Yeah, I was amazed to see that.
Yeah, it's intense. Like
Yeah.
it's if you have a river near you that you can actually use as a resource, then you can define your whole life around it. And to have it be poisoned, it's like a poison well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
This is Colombia.
Okay. Yeah, yeah,
Today.
yeah. Are you losing your mic signal? I'm not.
Hello. I think it's good.
All right, you're good.
Yeah, Colombia. This is Medellin, the river in Medellin, and it was a crazy situation because that river runs right in the middle of the city, and yet people really don't spend time there. I mean, it's like a no man's land kind of, you know.
Are they afraid of crime, or is it just a bummer, or what?
I think
brings
both.
them away?
The
Yeah.
crime, it's
Ugly.
super dirty, you know. But
Right.
but instead of doing anything about it, it's ignored. It's invisible. People just don't even want to think about it. They want to talk about it. They want to look at it, you know. And so again, this is in the middle of the city, you know. And so I was going to the middle of the city where it should be happening. It should be lively, and it's just abandoned.
Right.
And you know, it's in bad shape, but still, like, there are still beautiful moments. Yeah, this is the Superfund Site in New York. Hang out and it's yeah, it's amazing when you can still have you have a great time.
Yeah. I mean, that's the trick, right? We all, if we live around a Superfund site, we still have to live. Yeah. Oh, this is always my favorite, the bow of a canoe and a photograph.
So this is stuff from here, you know. Doing one of the prints. You know, typical sightseeing.
Yeah, totally. Beautiful stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, you got that basketball out, didn't you?
I did, yeah. This is a gold mine. A lot of the art happened here. But yeah, I don't know. You know, I really enjoyed it, and it was a great intro to the Woonie.
Yeah, I'm really glad you got to experience it that
Yeah.
way. That's
Yeah,
the best. And you
yeah.
saw it at a really good time of year. Like, it's cold. but
Beautiful.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, are you starting to think about other projects you would have with this river?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I think a couple months I'll be back, do some stuff.
Hit me up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I guess, Pippi, do you usually open up to questions at this point? I feel like you've got
Yeah,
it. Is
that's
there anything
good.
else you wanted to add in?
No.
So we're gonna open it up for a Q&A, so if anyone has questions they'd like to ask Sto and Erik, you have to use this microphone so that we can document you. Any questions?
This isn't too profound, but around New York, did you do any voyaging in the Meadowlands at all? There was a guy 20 years ago who went all over the Meadowlands in a boat kind of like yours, and wrote a book, fascinating book about it, and talking about a lost world is, you know, vanished cedar swamps out, cedar groves out there, and the remains of Penn Station and all sorts of everything in between, as well as, you know, brand new hotels popping up in Secaucus. Did you poke around the Meadowlands at all? On the other side of the city? Did you get over there?
I haven't so much.
It's all the same water systems.
Yeah, it's all the same. I feel like I've mostly been around where I live, like kind of deep into Brooklyn. But it's endless. Yeah, I want to go over there. You know, so much to explore.
Hi, thank you for coming to Providence and doing this work and being here tonight. I think I heard the word activism used at one point. I'm wondering, there's a lot of connections in your work to environmental issues or justice issues or other things. Do you see your work as being activist in any way or any other aspects of your life?
Yeah, I do. I feel like a lot of times those were separate worlds for me, but now they're colliding in a way that really happened naturally, and I want to keep pushing that. Recently, I've kind of joined a couple of groups where we're not all artists, and that's been really great to work with other activists and community organizers, but also be an artist and have my specific kind of perspective on things, but to work with other types of activists too. So I do, and I think that it's like the future for a lot of us is like working together and having artists be present for these types of situations and meetings and stuff.
You didn't really talk much about the materials that you ended up printing, but I'm curious if there are some materials that didn't end up sticking to the paper that you thought would stick, or if you were trying to guess what each material was as you were trying to make these prints.
Yeah, the stuff that did, I feel like kind of successfully stick was around Lyman Pond. We had found this kind of iron-oxidizing bacteria where the water was really like a rust color, and that stuff, those are the bigger prints in there, and that really stuck to the paper. I took a visit to a lot of the strainers along the river, you know, where there's kind of foamy, you know, pools of different things, and that stuff was less successful. But then there was also snow out, and kind of ice and snow. That was really interesting because it kind of, you know, things were like the dirt and debris was literally frozen, and I kind of laid paper on it, and as it sort of thawed out, it attached. So that was, I'd never done that before. But yeah, I feel like I know what to look for, you know, but also you never know what's going to happen with that stuff, and so there's a lot of things that, you know, yeah, they don't make the cut, you know.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hello both, thank you. I was wondering about how you get the wet paper back to where it needs to go.
That's a good question. It's no easy feat. You know, I think often too, if I'm in a boat and all of a sudden I have a giant wet floppy piece of toxic paper, it's really difficult for it not to flap in my face or for me to tear it or drop it or fall in the water. You know, it's a comedy really. I'm out there fighting the wind and the water. But I usually try to get it to shore and let it dry and then come back for it. So like when we went on our canoe ride, we came back for the prints, which was a good thing because we ended up falling in and they probably would have gotten ruined. But yeah, I usually stash them in secret spots and come back for them later. And in New York, I have my shack where I'll store them in my shack as well and let them dry there. But it's not easy. A lot of good ones get ruined, and you know, wet paper. It's not. It's not easy. Good question.
Hi, Sto and Erik. First, thank you for hosting this and to bring the awareness of what's happening with our waterway. And my name is Mike Rodriguez from Rhode Island Creative. I'm an advocate for the visual arts in Rhode Island, and I cover the arts 7 days a week. I came across a fiber artist, also an activist, who works with organic yarn, who tests all the waterways for all the chemicals in regards to how it affects the yarn, the dyeing process. And I like to be able to put the two of you together. There may be some collaboration that might be able to spark a whole new direction of what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I'd love to. Thank you. Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Has writing ever been a part of your work, or do you have any interest? Would you see those worlds of like image and text coming together, and maybe also, I don't know, I think about activism with that too.
You know, I started writing about the day of like kind of a journal of that time. when I was out there, and I realized there were a couple pieces that people bought, and I gave them the writing, and I realized that it's part of the story, actually, and I'm realizing that more and more, that the journey and all the stories are just as important as the piece of art, you know, I mean, or it is part of it. So, yeah, I've been writing more and more and trying to figure out how to combine the two, but I think that's, I realize when I talk about it, I tell stories, you know, about what I did or what happened, and there's a lot of the work is in the experience, so the process. Thanks.
So some of the places you've been, or Williamsburg, Brooklyn, the river's seen huge changes since the days when there were the car hulks and so forth along the riverbank. And as our river changes here, the Woonasquatucket, we have a vision plan for the river. How can we make it conducive to continuing art and creative expression along the river?
I think it would be great to work with artists in just terms of like aesthetically visualizing what it can look like and how to make it accessible to all different kinds of people. I would love there to be like a diverse group of people that were able to voice their opinion on what that should be, and I think I'm starting to see that. I don't know if that's happened as much here. Maybe it is. I'm starting to see it in New York, where there's more opportunities for us to be part of the conversation. And so I think it's really just starts there, being able to talk about it and know about it, before it just happens.
I mean, it's a challenge too, in that like part of the reason like a river or unused mill or any of that is so ripe for people to kind of come to these artistic expressions and things is because it's totally ignored and undeveloped and forgotten and left to go fallow.
Yeah.
Like it's that cycle, right? The second you're like, oh, we need to clean this up and develop it, it's great. It kind of pushes that to the side a little bit.
Right. And I know we've both been through that, right?
Right, yeah.
And that's a confusing situation to be an artist and kind of be the initial, start of like gentrification, but then not be able to see it through, and just kind of get kicked out of the conversation.
Right. Yeah. I came to the metaphor of it like an explosion. Like you're there, it's this wave exploding at you. Like things are developing and changing, and now that explosion is so far past me, and I'm just like in the world that it created. Just paying bills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's real.
Yeah. So I don't know how helpful that input is.
I don't know either, right? But
yeah. Once we get the rivers really nice, I guess we'll go to the abandoned malls.
yeah. Calm down.
Any other comments or questions from the audience? No?
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I want to say is I just want to do a shout out. My very good friend Beatrice McGeek always had the awesome idea that the political entities that we live under shouldn't be like council districts or like zones or anything like that, but it should really be your watershed, should be what's organizing people politically to work in the common interest together. I don't know, I wanted to get that out. Take that thought with you as you go off into the world. Like, this is the thing we really all share, is where we get our water from, where the river is, where everything that lives around us comes from. And that's all I got to say. And I really like this guy. He's awesome. Do you have anything you want to go out on?
Thanks for having me, Providence. I got a city crush on the city.
Thank you to everyone for coming. This is the third of 6 of these artist talks that we'll be hosting. Our next one is still TBA with the